Hello and welcome. Now we have discovered all the ACI fabric, and we have already did all the required configuration in order to have a fully functioning fabric. We need now to start operating and configuring our Cisco ACI. In order to understand how the operation of the Cisco ACI work, you should understand there are two main components for Cisco in Cisco ACI. There are the access policies, and there is also the logical construct. Okay. The access policies are the policies required to configure the physical attachment to the Cisco ACI fabric or leaf, to be precise. For instance, you have a server here, you have a bare metal server, you have virtualization, you have WAN, all the physical configuration required to attach those nodes to your fabric or to your leaf, it will be configured via the access policy. Whereas the logical grouping and the logical configuration, such as the VLAN segmentation and the routing table, will be configured via the logical construct. Of course, there is a relationship between the access policy and the logical construct, but this is how the configuration work on Cisco ACI. You need to separate the access, the physical attachment and the physical configuration required for your node, apart from your logical configuration such as the VLANs and the logical grouping. Now again, this slide explains what is the physical construct, or sorry, what is the access policy. Access policies configure external facing interface that connect devices such as hypervisor, host, network attached storage, router, fixed interfaces. Access policies enable the configuration of the board channel, LLDB, CDB, and those are all the configuration related to the access to the physical attachment to the environment. You have the LLDB, you have the CDB, you have the bond, you have the LACB, the lag, the aggregation interface. Also, you have the speed, the interface speed. All of these configuration, which are related to the physical attachment to the external devices, will be configured via the access policy. You have to understand one fact regarding Cisco ACI. It's a policy-driven approach in terms of operation. It's not a CLI-driven. You don't need now CLI in order to do the task or do the configuration environment. You need to have predefined policies which are configured throughout your entire fabric. You see, one of the objectives of having the Cisco ACI is having the entire fabric acting as if it's one big switch. In order to make all of these switches, all of these components, such as a spinal leaf, works in harmony, we need to do some sort of orchestration. Hence comes the role of the Cisco ABIC. So one of the roles that the ABICs play here is do the policy enforcement and the orchestration within our fabric. So you no longer need to do the CLI individually in each and every switch. In order to perform this orchestration, we need to have one unified policy, and this policy will be deployed throughout our entire fabric. And one of the main advantages of having this policy-driven approach is the reusability. The more you try to operate the Cisco ACI, the more you will find a predefined policies that were initially configured at the staging phase of the Cisco ACI, where you can use it in a later stage on a later stage of your operation, of your day-to-day operation. Whereas the CLI, the more demand, the more increasing of the workload, the more CLI required, and the more complex it gets. And this is one of the big advantage of Cisco ACI. Now I know, of course, at the initial stage it might look strange. You might hate how it operates, but the more and more you start to operate the Cisco ACI, the more the reusability factor will come into play, and you will find that it's easier in terms of operation in the long run. Now, we'll discuss here briefly how the access policy configure. The access policy configure usually by defining a policy, okay? This policy can be like, for instance, an interface policy or a switch policy. When we talk about an interface policy, we're talking about interface level policy. Like, for instance, you need to configure something on particular interface, such as enabling CDB or LDB, okay? So from the interface level, you define all the policy required. CDB enable or disable, LLDB enable or disable, duplex, speed, all of those configuration. We used to do it in CLI. Now we no longer need to do that. We will have to predefine it in a policy. And after we predefine all the policies together, we need to group them into one policy group. This policy group acts as a container for a subset of interface policies that work together. After we group them, we have to associate all of them into profile. Profile here means identification. I need to decide either I'm going to associate it with an interface profile referring to Ethernet 1/3, or a switch profile pointing to a particular switch in my fabric. And this is the logic behind the access policy in general. Now, what type of interface policy can I have in the environment? The interface protocol policies here, sorry, what type of interface protocol policy that I have in the environment? The interface protocol policy here, there is a multiple protocols that that can be enabled from the interface level. There is the link level, okay, which referring to I'm using full duplex or half duplex, link speed, for instance, the LLDB, link level discovery protocol, CDB, LACB for the link aggregation, net flow, or the control plane policing. All of these policies needs to be predefined. I prefer to do it at the initial staging of at the initial phase, initial staging of the Cisco ACI, in order to benefit from the reusability feature on the long run. So those are the interface protocol policies that needs to be configured in order to make the interface operational. Now, after we configure all of the interface policy together, we need to group them into interface policy group. And what is the interface policy group? Interface policy group are a template that dictate the interface level configuration via interface protocol policies that was already predefined and associated with AAEB. Now we'll discuss what is the AAEB in a later stage. However, what I need you to understand here is the interface policy group is like a big container, and it contains all the interface protocols that you have defined, such as CDB, LLDB, LLCB, LACB, or VPC, or whatever. Now, this diagram here explains how the interface access policy works. First, you have the interface protocol policies that you need to predefine and configure. You have the link level here. It's duplex, full duplex, speed, and so on. You have CDB, you have LLDB, you have LACB. You have a bunch of protocols or interface protocols that you need to group them into interface policy group. After you define the interface policy group, you need to associate them with the interface profile. The interface profile, simply what it will do, one of the main components of the interface profile is the interface selector. Interface selector will associate all of this subset of protocol or interface level protocol into a fixed or certain interface ID, such as Ethernet 101, 102, 103, and so on. And by defining the interface profile, we will be associating this interface profile into a switch profile. Switch profile can be leaf 101, 102, 103, and so on. Now, The interface group, policy group is reusable. You can use it on different leaf profile, different interface profile. But this is how the logic of the interface access policy works. First, you define the subset of policies, group them into interface policy group, associate them with interface policy profile, allocate this profile into a fixed switch profile. Another important element here, which is the attachable access entity profile. We have discussed that. We'll explain that on a later slide. And now it's time to explain what is the attachable access entity profile. In a plain English, the attachable access entity profile act as a passage between the access policy and the logical construct. The attachable access entity profile takes all your physical access, your physical configuration, and provide them to the logical construct where it can subdivide or divide or do all the logical configuration required for this particular access policy. In order to do so, you need to understand that the attachable access entity profile it's also a subset. It's also a policy that need to be attached to your group interface, policy interface. And within the attachable access entity profile, there are two policies that you need to define also. You need to define the VLAN pool, and the VLAN pool policy responsible for allocating certain or VLAN range to this particular interfaces or to this particular interface policy. So you need to define the VLAN pool, and also you need to define the domain. What is the domain in Cisco ACI? Domain in Cisco ACI refers to the following. You have the VMM domain. So the VMM domain indicates that the server that attached to the environment is going to have virtual machine running on. It's a hypervisor server. Or you have the physical domain. The physical domain indicates that you're attaching to a bare metal server. You have the bridge outside. Bridge outside here meaning that you're attached to a switch. You have the routed outside. So to put things together, here is how the logic works. Now, let's say, for instance, you have physical servers connected to the environment. At the access policy, you need to define all the interface protocol policy, associate them into a policy group, create an interface profile telling Cisco ACI in specific where this server will be connected. After that, you associate this profile into a switch. You define for the interface group policy. By the way, in the interface group policy level, you define the attachable access entity profile to allocate what range of VLAN this server will be having, and what type of domain this server is. Is it physical bare metal server, virtual, could be a router or a switch. Now this diagram explains how the attachable access entity profile works. We have agreed that we have interface policies which contain interface policy group, and this interface policy group is being assigned to an interface profile, which interface profile tells you what the interface selector or whatever interface, what is specifically the interface you're attached to. Within the interface policy group, there is the attachable entity profile. The attachable entity profile is having the domain configured. The domain instruct or tell the Cisco ACI what type of server you're attached to. Is it physical server, bare metal server? Is it external router or switch or hypervisor server? And within the domain, there is also a VLAN pool that also will be configured. There is a VLAN, could be a VXLAN if you're speaking to outside VXLAN switch, and also there is a storage capability. We'll focus more into VLAN here. In the pool itself, you're defining what is the VLAN range this server or this external node will be having. Now, here comes the big picture. Here, how everything is put together. You have the policies here are configured, the LCB, CDB, LLDB, and whatever. And you have the interface group policy, which also having the attachable access entity profile. The attachable access entity profile indicate what type of external node will be connected to a fabric via the physical domain, as we mentioned. It could be VM domain, it could be physical server, or it could be a router or a switch. All of those are having a fixed VLAN range that they will configure on. And of course, the attachable access entity profile, in specific, the domain itself will be associated with the logical construct here to provide or act as a passage for the access policy to be configured in the logical construct, as we will see on the next video. Now, after everything is configured, what we will be doing here, all of this configuration need to be associated with interface selector that reside within interface profile. The interface selector will tell which interface in precise all of this configuration will be having. Now, after we configure the interface profile, that will also need to be associated with a switch profile. The switch profile tells you what switch exactly within the ACI fabric it's connected to. Could be switch 101, 102, or whatever. And the switch itself also contain a switch selector, which tells you whatever switch all of this configuration connected at. So of course, there is also a switch policy group which contain some interface, some configuration required for the switch itself. Could be BBDU filter or any global configuration required from the switch level itself, and it's also associated to the profile. I know it can be a little bit complex, but you need to deploy it. You need to experiment it on the lab environment, and you need to keep practicing, because the more you practice, the more you can understand how it works. Now, I hope this has been informative, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.